I want to say thank you to IHA Innovations for inviting me today, and Ivan Rupnik, my partner, as well as Dan Hardcastle from HUD. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about offsite construction for housing research. We're going to discuss the roadmap and some other things that MODEX has been working on. MODEX is a research, education, and advisory group. We focus on addressing societal challenges, in particular housing, through industrialization of offsite construction. Here, I'm Ryan Smith. I'm at the University of Arizona, founding partner of MODEX. Ivan Rupnik is going to be following me. A partner that could not be here today is Tyler Schmetterer. Ivan has an associate professor position at Northeastern University in Boston. And Tyler Schmetterer has about 20 years of experience doing modular projects up and down the eastern seaboard. As someone that recently purchased a home myself due to a move and currently trying to help my adult children secure housing, I personally attest to the housing crisis in the United States. The Joint Centers for Housing Studies State of the Nation report this year outlined a marked increase in moderately and severely burdened households from 2001 to today. Inflation is causing rents and mortgages to outpace incomes. The percentage of population that is below 80% area median income and spending more than 30% of their annual income on housing is hitting a fever pitch. McKinsey Global Institute reported in 2017 succinctly outlining a contributing factor to the rising housing costs. Around the globe, construction productivity has either been stagnant or declined for the better part of the last half century. During this time, nearly every other sector has improved: manufacturing, transportation, etc. Statistics from Stanford Center for Integrated Facilities Engineering indicates that the U.S. has been one of the biggest losers in productivity in construction. It has deindustrialized effectively its means and methods since 1968. There's a chart showing that curve of construction versus other sectors from the perspective of productivity. And while there has been less investment in technology, there is a decline also in labor skills and workforce availability. This exacerbates the problem. Low productivity plus labor shortage combined with inflation is resulting in a severe housing affordability crisis. McKinsey claimed that in order to overcome the labor shortage and productivity challenges and realize more stabilization of housing prices, the construction industry needs to move to a, quote, manufacturing-style production system, unquote, to realize 1,000% or greater productivity gains. This message has caught the attention of Wall Street and the IT sector investors in particular, who for the last 5 years have poured money into robots and technology. However, many of these ventures have struggled because, in our opinion, they have not paid enough attention to the first part of the report, in which McKinsey outlined a 60% or greater productivity gain through contextual improvements, such as reshaping regulations, restructuring contracts, and improving workforce training and supply chains. From 2016 to 2018, MODEX was engaged with the Modular Building Institute, the trade association, International Trade Association for Permanent Modular Construction, to identify barriers to offsite construction growth in the United States and to chart a roadmap for overcoming them. We advocated for 4 key improvements: increased capacity, capability, and competency of the manufacturing companies, the development of industry-wide standards and a stronger data culture with companies and better data for the industry overall, and finally, stronger partnerships with entities that define our built environment.
Yeah.
One of the clearest outcomes of this 5% in 5-year initiative with MBI was their partnership that emerged with the International Code Council on a series of offsite construction standards that have been impactful, including for Salt Lake City. You'll hear about many of these today from Ryan Kolker at ICC, from John at MBI, and others. As a result of these efforts, MBI has exceeded the goal of achieving 5% of the market share in 5 years. We also have representation from, as I mentioned, from MDI and ICC that you can contact regarding this effort. In the late 1960s, HUD initiated a program called Operation Breakthrough. Indeed, it was intended to infuse the market with industrialized means of housing production. Although the program did not reach its full potential, the program paved the way for a national code called the Manufactured Home Code, or the HUD Code, 1976. In the late 90s, 1 in 9 new single-family homes in the United States sold was a manufactured house. Today, that's 1 in 11. The manufactured home industry has evolved over time into what we would call the permanent modular industry, built to the standard International Residential Code and the International Building Code. Permanent modular, sometimes referred to as volumetric modular, grew out of but diversified away from HUD codes. Modular construction following the manufactured home industry uses many of the same manufacturing logics, a similar sales platform through dealers, although there are dealers direct to developers. Certification and inspection approaches in their business are similar. This means that most of the industry, modular manufacturing, that follow modular manufacturing, may not have design and construction services in-house, and this includes the laborious process of regulatory navigation that is unfamiliar to stakeholders who are engaging with modular construction. Through Operation Breakthrough and the resulting manufactured home industry, HUD accurately observed over a half a century ago, quote, large-scale application of industrialized building systems is not limited by technologies, design, or cost factors, but only by institutional constraints. 1969. The U.S. has been leading the way in industrialized construction for more than half a century, but outside of the very successful HUD code, Manufactured Home Code, we have not adequately addressed the institutional constraints that keep offsite technology from delivering on the broad societal benefits of permanent single and multifamily housing. With the growing interest in offsite construction nationally, in 2021, HUD returned to the topic and engaged MODEX and the National Institute of Building Sciences to develop an offsite construction research roadmap. The aim of the roadmap was to identify the barriers and challenges to increasing offsite housing uptake and adoption, and thereby realize an increase in housing supply. 3 core objectives were outlined for the development of the report. First, the report was to identify the current state of knowledge concerning offsite construction for housing. Second, the report was intended to identify the research areas, the questions, the knowledge gaps in offsite construction for housing. And third, the report was to be disseminated to industry, academia, and government. The report covered all types of housing, including single-family, manufactured, multifamily, and disaster-related housing. A project technical committee was assembled consisting of industry and academic leaders in offsite and affordable housing. A few of these experts are here today, including Justin Stewart, I'm here on my left, and Cindy Davis from Commonwealth of Virginia. The group included representatives from research, manufacturing, design, regulation, construction, development, and finance. The group, led by MODEX, engaged in surveys and focus groups to identify the key knowledge gaps to evolving offsite construction nationally. A virtual workshop was held to refine the key areas identified by the project technical committee. The workshop had 30 participants representing government, research, trade associations, regulatory, manufacturing, supplier, architecture, engineering, investment, and general contract. The result is 6 primary topics or knowledge gaps that limit the evolution of offsite housing. These are listed in order of priority, including regulatory, standards, finance, project delivery, labor and workforce, and business models. Under each topic in the report is a list of 10 to 12 subtopics and research questions that can be addressed to overcome the barriers to scaling offsite construction for housing. There are a total of 240 unique questions primed for research and industry engagement. The top of the knowledge barrier identified in this report to evolving offsite housing is regulatory framework challenges. This is the same barrier identified by HUD in 1969 during Operation Breakthrough, when the country was poised to utilize industrialized manufacturing for housing. MODEX has found that this is a key barrier abroad as well. regulatory frameworks is a key lever to addressing the other 5 barriers from the roadmap: standards, finance, contracts, workforce, and business models. Why are regulations a barrier to offsite construction for housing? And why is ModX, Ivory Innovations, and other speakers today concerned about this issue? We have found that in some jurisdictions, zoning ordinances are limiting offsite construction. This is because zoning laws can indicate that no construction will be manufactured offsite, lumping all factory-built construction, HUD code, IRC, IBC, and otherwise in the same group. Zoning restrictions may limit heights to which buildings can be built. This might work for on-site construction, but for off-site, in modular, for example, the floor-to-floor heights are higher because of the ceiling plane and the floor to make the structural box. Regarding building codes, the primary challenge is concerning what we call the inspectability of construction on the job site. In the image, you can see a traditional on-site constructed house that is inspected in 3 major stages: pre-pour, framing, and final inspection. With off-site construction, the framing inspection in the center is performed off-site, sometimes outside of city boundaries or even out in the country, depending on where the manufacturing facility is. With a recent code update, off-site fabricated sub-assemblies are now allowed in Salt Lake City that can be procured outside of city limits. This is where third parties go to inspect and certify that these are being built according to the code. Advocates in the state of Utah, we just had a meeting about this, led by Salt Lake City and Ivory Innovations, are now considering a statewide modular code to address regulatory limitations in other Utah municipalities. There are 3 ways that ModX proposes to overcome the challenges associated with building code regulatory barriers in off-site constructed housing. First is education of stakeholders, especially building code officials. Second is the creation of product and process standards for off-site, permitting, and inspection. And third is the development of performance-based codes. Each will be discussed briefly. Research by HUD in 2005 found that, quote, code officials at the local level have the legal authority to accept or reject the application of any new building product or system innovation. They can be the ultimate showstopper, unquote. The authority having jurisdiction, the municipality, has the authority in our federal system for the interpretation of the IRC and the IBC. They can layer on additional regulations to augment these codes. What this means is that the code official on the ground has the legal authority to accept or reject off-site construction. Oster and Quigley in 1977 wrote, quote, thus it appears that the progressiveness of local building codes are directly related to the professional attributes of the local officials, the amount and type of their professional contact, their backgrounds, and their education, unquote. One strategy to overcoming regulatory barriers in off-site construction is to engage with building officials directly through education and knowledge partnerships, early and often. After the off-site process is practiced in a jurisdiction and then a region, it becomes socialized through precedent. This process is innovation diffusion, similar to how innovations diffuse in other free market industries that are also regulated. As Rogers, leading scholar on innovation studies from 1962 forward, states, quote, innovation diffusion is the communication of a new process, product, or service through social systems that require a steady flow of information. This can occur through individuals and organizations. Certainly, in offsite construction, there is a spectrum of enhancement, is what we call it. From on the load value enhancement side, on the left, there are pre-cut kits, and then all the way to fully manufactured homes, 100% complete, on the right, and then various levels of enhancement in between. Because of the lack of knowledge amongst code officials and municipalities in permitting and inspecting offsite construction, the Modular Building Institute and the International Code Council have developed the 1200 and 1205 standard. This is a process standard about how to address subassemblies, panels, and modules that are manufactured in a factory and not inspectable on the job site when they come. The process standard outlines how authorities having jurisdiction can inspect in the factory with their own staff or through a third party, preferably through a third party agency that is approved for such. On the other side of the regulatory approval process is product standards. This might be, for example, a new framing technology that replaces lightwood framing. This might be a kit that's open for inspection on the job site and could be imbued with an evaluative service report through verification, testing, and compatibility with code prescriptions. An effort is being researched by ModX with Saint-Gobain Certainty, a global materials company, ICC, and the Commonwealth of Virginia to evaluate the potential of writing a product standard that can be combined with a process standard so that enclosed subassemblies, such as an enhanced panel with insulation, wiring, waterproofing, even exterior siding and interior gypsum wallboard, could be pre-approved as a product, and that could supersede the need for special permits, inspection process associated with modular construction. This pre-certification of a system approach is something ModX has observed with partners that are in the room today as we traveled to Japan and Sweden this last year. I'll elaborate just a bit. Materials, products, and systems can comply with building codes in 3 ways. To a reference standard prescribed in the code, through a reference standard that cites standards outside of the code to organizations that maintain these standards for structure, enclosure, or other systems, or can be approved as an alternate material, product, or subassembly. The IRC and the IBC codes state that the authority having jurisdiction is the judge regarding an approved product as an approved alternate. Also, the code states that the material, product, or system is to be at least equivalent or better to the prescribed code material, product, or system. Sorry, I didn't advance there. So that shows the code there, and it's demonstrating in yellow that the AHJ is the judge, and it needs to be equivalent to the code provision, or better. And for any innovation, new product, or system to be accepted by the regulatory officials, it is to be tested, certified, and evaluated. This is imbued in the evaluation report as to provide evidence of local code official that the material, product, or subassembly complies with the building code as an alternate. Over time, the evaluation report, or to be specific, the ICC-ES report, can become a standard or even referenced in the code itself, as we have seen with systems like cross-laminated timber, metal building systems, and other prefabricated systems. However, this has not occurred with closed panel and modular construction yet. This map from ICC outlines the progress and continued challenge associated with building code regulatory barriers and offsite. Each state has a unique way in which it addresses offsite construction. As you can see, the state of Utah relies on local plan review and local inspection for managing all offsite construction projects. This makes it difficult for offsite to compete, as each jurisdiction will have to be educated and socialized to the process. Offsite manufacturers in Idaho, for example, and there are several of them, some here today, are shipping product to California daily. They're not able to enter the Utah market effectively. As a statewide modular code is being enacted currently and thought of, it could overcome this scaling challenge for offsite in Utah and realize more housing supply. A final approach ModX is investigating with partners is to test performance-based codes. The current IRC and IBC are based on a prescriptive code that outlines specifications and standards, and this has shown a lack of incentive for innovation and change in construction. The Eurocode is a performance code in Europe that outlines the performance parameters and puts the onus on manufacturers to demonstrate compliance. Performance can be fire, structure, thermal performance, moisture, durability, etc. In Sweden, for example, this has led to low-carbon lightwood frame buildings, opening up new market for closed panel construction at 9 stories, and mass timber that can compete head-to-head with steel and concrete. ModX is actively seeking pilot opportunities with ICC and partners in the room with jurisdictions to test the idea of employing an unused but currently written performance-based code from ICC in jurisdictions across the United States. The offsite construction research roadmap addressed 5 other barrier topics, as we've talked about: finance, project delivery, contracts, workforce labor, and business models with a similar rigor. In conclusion of the report, there were 7 key takeaways. Since publishing the report earlier this year, number 4 through 7 takeaways have framed our approach at ModX to continuing to advocate for more productive means of housing production via offsite. These include documentation and dissemination of U.S. best practices and lessons learned. Pilot projects are key to demonstration and adoption. Education and training are key for a secure, knowledgeable workforce and to learn globally and act locally. Since publishing the report earlier this year, ModX is continuing to advocate for this with respect to the last key takeaway, learning internationally. This project, funded also by HUD, is to develop a strategic plan for the future of offsite in the United States based on the lessons from the UK, Japan, and Sweden, all more advanced innovation frameworks in offsite. This project will be presented by my partner, Ivan Rupnik.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for setting up the difficult challenge that we're addressing. Now we're going to go into the past, into the future, to see how we could very easily address all of these things, as Ryan has alluded to. So we have been very fortunate at ModX to be supported by HUD on a second project after the research roadmap, as Ryan has alluded to, which is closer to the microphone. Is that better? Okay, so we've been very fortunate at ModX, we feel like we're at HUD, to working on a second project with HUD, HUD's current and future role in U.S. industrialized construction, started in 22 and should be delivered in 24, which is really built around three areas. So area one, looking at the current U.S. sector and framework for offsite construction, which Ryan has alluded to already, and particularly looking at HUD's role in establishing that framework, not just the manufacturing housing code, which is well known, but really most offsite companies, whether they know it or not, are working in a framework that HUD built, and maybe HUD forgot about a little bit too. So that's one big area. That's actually the most difficult part of the process. Then the most fun part of the process, which has involved many folks in this room, is going and seeing three very advanced, what we call sectors and frameworks. The United Kingdom, which is also influencing Ireland, Australia's, and New Zealand's frameworks currently. And Ireland has actually been very supportive in the process. Sweden, which is really driving what the European Union plans to do in the next 20 years to reach its carbon targets. And Japan, which really demonstrates how manufactured mindsets can be fully applied to housing. And really, factories produce housing not like cars, but using the same principles to produce the same results. So those three sectors we've been working with and are completing a report for HUD and for all of you, because it will be public. And then the final step, which we're starting with HUD, will be a workshop process to develop a strategic plan where HUD would be the leader, but obviously it would include other federal groups and key partners, many of whom are in this room, to articulate a strategy that would support a national innovation framework for industrialized housing delivery. So I'm going to define those two terms. An innovation framework is a foundational set of practices and tools that helps organizations generate ideas, evaluate those ideas, and turn the best ideas into value add for the organization. We have also found abroad that this concept is valuable in understanding countries as well as companies. So a framework can apply to a company, can also apply to a context, a jurisdiction, or a country. And industrialized housing delivery is a term that's widely used abroad, not so much here, which is more of a holistic approach to providing housing industrially and considers regulation, contracts, design, manufacturing, assembly, and post-occupancy as a set of interrelated activities. So all of those bring the savings that we sometimes attribute just to moving to a factory. Moving to a factory is not enough. Click. So just going back a little bit more into what HUD did for all of us. Thank you, HUD, 50 years ago. And actually, even before HUD, the Fair Housing Act identified housing as a key societal problem for the US and called for the construction of 26 million homes in 10 years and argued that without increased supply, there could not be increased affordability. No construction material or system alone could do that. Supply alone would impact housing, and it would impact those most in need of housing the most, but it would really need to be sector-wide. So in 1969, following on that, HUD Secretary George Romney saw industrialized housing delivery as essential achieving those goals due to already a lack of labor, land, and resources, as well as already a low productivity in conventional construction. Conventional construction had been rising and had flatlined a few years earlier. So in '69, HUD launched Operation Breakthrough to break through particular barriers. We've kind of updated that and simplified it for you there. We're really focused on two kinds of barriers: internal barriers within the industry. George Romney saw that construction did not think the way the other manufacturing industries thought. And what he found common to all other American industries was an R&D-centric business model. Without R&D-centric business models, we do not have higher productivity. All those other industries have an R&D-centered business model, which just means you have a percentage of your money that goes to research and development and funds knowledge. And that was an internal barrier that he personally had experience with in the automotive industry and wanted to solve for construction. The external barriers were even more specifically outlined by HUD. They had to do with a lack of a national building code, the fragmented and localized nature of permitting and inspection that Ryan spoke to already, and the persistence of prescriptive codes as opposed to performance-based specifications needed for manufacturing. All of this was spelled out very clearly by HUD more than 50 years ago. And so Operation Breakthrough, unfortunately, was just getting going in 1974 when an energy crisis, one of many now, cut funding prematurely, just as the 22 companies that had been participating in the program were beginning to optimize their systems and to scale production, leading to what we like to call an IC extinction event. All of those companies and all of that knowledge and all of that research disappeared. So nevertheless, Operation Breakthrough, even in its partially failed sense, left behind a framework within which the sector still operates, including the 35 or 38, depending on who you ask, state industrialized construction programs, as well as things like being able to ship oversized loads, among many other things. Those all came from the framework, from Operation Breakthrough. Those are all things we still use today. More specifically, in 1976, HUD developed a HUD code. It was the first national preemptive performance-based code in the world, and it transformed the mobile home industry into a safer and higher quality manufactured housing industry. 9 million homes have been built under that since, at a 50% savings compared to comparable site-built construction. But those companies still lack the R&D culture that George Romney was after and saw as important to manufacturing in general. So if we jump today, there have been 2 other breakthroughs in other countries around the same time, looking at similar issues, Sweden and Japan. Sweden's program called the Million Homes Program, and Japan's called the Pilot House Programs. So in 1965, Sweden built 1 million homes over 10 years. When you adjust for population, that's 26 million homes, if you looked at it in the US, providing low-interest loans for companies and support for renters and homeowners, and through that creating a dependable pipeline for Sweden's existing IC companies, allowing them to scale. And that program stabilized housing cost for 20 years. It really achieved all of its goals. And in 1995, building on that success, Sweden replaced its prescriptive code with a performance-based code, further accelerating the growth of IC, or industrialized construction, and improving quality, affordability, and sustainability, also helping them move from single family, which by then was already 90% off-site, to multifamily, which was around 0 at the time and has now grown. So today, 45% of all housing in Sweden is industrialized and produced off-site, 90% of single family, which has been a long process, and 40% of multifamily, which is actually relatively recent, that has accelerated. Overall, also, it is the first country, as research we've seen, actually provide national evidence that industrialized housing delivery, not just moving to a factory, but a whole other set of list of requirements, have produced a 10% productivity increase sector-wide compared to conventional construction. That's real data that we need to be able to even track how we're being successful or not. So one company of many that we followed over the years, Lindbäck's big, a volumetric modular fabricator, is a good example of how this has impacted companies more specifically. So companies like Lindbäck's have evolved with this national innovation framework over the last 50 years in dialogue. Thanks to Sweden's innovation framework, Lindbäck's is able to deliver a 9-story light wood frame multifamily volumetric building on complex urban sites, something we can't do. We were actually able to visit one of these. Lindbäck's practices what we would call true modularization, utilizing a standardized closed panel assembly that supports variable transportation mods, flexible floor plan, and unique urban design schemes. So this drawing by a graduate student, I think, encapsulates well. This is a volumetric system built on a closed panel system. The closed panels are highly repetitive. They work well with manufacturing. The volumes are actually quite custom. The key module in Sweden, the key subassembly, is the panel, not the volumetric module. And we are still operating within a framework that HUD built for the manufactured housing code for single family. When we look to more complex single family or multifamily, we need a different grain of standardization. And Sweden has provided that using what they call American framing, by the way. Thanks, Sweden. This change in building system, and it's the building system first, not the factory layout, that also supports more efficient factory layouts and better utilization of existing commercialized manufacturing equipment. So NSF, you don't need to throw millions of dollars to fund this. It exists, but we can't use it to our full capacity. So if you look at a factory, on the left, that is, whether it's volumetric or manufactured, it still operates really around the way we inspect on site. If we look at a factory on the right, which there are factories like this in the US now, but there are too few, we have true manufacturing, a high degree of sub-assemblies being manufactured, and then assembly of modules that are more customized, that shift with markets and with customers. So Sweden's National Innovation Framework gradually transitioned from a prescriptive code specifically developed for Sweden to an EU-wide performance code intended to increase innovation and competition and increase affordability for EU citizens for the entire 27-member bloc. 27 states that don't like each other, that have had wars with each other, that don't speak the same language, so it's not easy to do this in Europe either. There is fragmentation all over the world. And they've gone this is a diagram that was provided to us by our partners in Sweden. Really, this is the pyramid of shifting from a prescriptive code to a performance code, starting with in the 90s, where really their code was very similar to ours, and moving, and then it disappeared because I pressed mute. Moving in the first iteration of Eurocode to where the prescriptive code is no longer describing all of the elements that are required, and moving actually in the future, moving in the future into really the same kind of regulatory framework that we see in US industry, where quality control is really the interface between what happens in a factory and what is happening in the permitting space. This is what we have in every other industry in the US. This is common practice in Sweden and Japan, and it's going to become common practice in the rest of the European Union to address housing affordability and to address the climate crisis. The buttons. So Sweden's early adoption and success with the first iteration of an EU-wide performance code has encouraged the country now, 20 years later, to lead and exceed in adoption of the next iteration of this international innovation framework, Eurocode 2.0, which is being developed right now. The same innovation framework is being retooled to achieve decarbonization and net zero goals for the Union. In my slides. So you would see there's a little bit of an error, but in the back, essentially, carbon is going down as units are going up, really, and this is something that Sweden has been able to demonstrate. And it's also given, so again, underneath this, it's also given industry confidence to invest in bio-based materials. So for example, Lindbäck's already has a very low carbon system. This shift to a clearer economy of carbon has allowed them to, for example, now shift from a mineral wool-based installation to cellulose-based installation because it actually makes financial sense. This is not something they're doing philanthropically or to be innovators. It's part of a national framework. It's part of an economy. It has clear goals. This is something we need, and this is something we have in every other industry in the US as well. So in Japan, even in some ways further along, Japan, looking very much at HUD and very much in dialogue with HUD in 1969, pushed their IC sector forward by helping existing companies and startups shift to an R&D and customer-centric business model and to scale through streamlining of permitting and inspection and mortgage rate deductions for pre-certified housing systems, looking very much at also what are mortgage rate reductions, but giving specific mortgage rate reductions for societal goals. You want better carbon? You get a 1/4 point off on your mortgage. Very simple. Sounds very American to me, by the way. 1980s, following that process, Japan's industrialized home builders helped lift the rest of the conventional builders by sharing some of that knowledge. And in 2000, the same innovation framework has been used to help, again, achieve societal goals, circularity, making sure that those building materials don't go back into a landfill. Well, that's part of the same system. Net zero, part of the same system. And so 30% of housing uses some degree of pre-certification. 80% of housing is industrialized. 15% is highly, highly industrialized, really, the kind of systems that we imagine when we think about factory production. And how does this impact companies? Well, the framework allows a company to deliver a custom home 40 days after the customer signs on the dotted line. It allows, without this framework, a company like Seki Suiheim would not be able to move its modules station to station every 3 minutes. We've seen this with the naked eye. It is stunning. And we have not seen, and it would not allow, or a completed home assembled in a few hours, which we can also prove. It is, you have to see it to believe it. And for, again, a company like Seki Suiheim, for one of the many, producing 14,000, which is already a lot, custom homes on scattered sites, not in subdivisions, with a high degree of standardization and a high degree of customization. 500,000, 500,000 in 50 years. And it's really the success, and we're studying this, the success is the key to Japan's continually improving regulatory framework that rewards capital-intensive investment in people and technology, one that achieves a high degree of safety and quality while streamlining the entire project delivery process. It's all of those things related that have supported it. Really, again, that framework, these frameworks, what's really interesting, HUD set up a really strong framework. Frameworks need to be able to evolve and adapt. So again, the same framework that allowed Japan in the 70s and 80s to increase housing supply and lower cost, the same framework that's been retooled through a dialogue between industry and government and academia to allow for circularity. 100% of Japanese builders, Japanese builders are responsible for 100% of construction waste. That sounds like a pain in the butt, but if it's clearly built into the economy, that's not. It's part of a competitive advantage. 20% of net sales for one of these companies comes from refurbishment now because of those clear relationships. The same 100% of new housing in Japan has been set to be net zero by 2030. 95% of this housing for those companies using offsite construction already is. So it's that dialogue. It's those industrialized housing delivery companies that are able to show the rest of the builders what they can do. And then they shape the regulatory framework for conventional construction, the opposite of where we are at right now. And so as HUD accurately predicted in 1968, a decline in innovation at the company and sector scale would lead to deindustrialization of construction. So HUD predicted what happened. So McKinsey is just reporting really what HUD knew and warned us about. And as Ryan has said, the limits are not technological. We have found the limits to be institutional. And so instead of focusing on technology alone, we need to frame technology at the at the company level in a knowledge and innovation framework, which actually is quite well known. But we also need a national innovation framework, which is also something we have, but we need to retool. And so we've seen the key ingredient at the company level is a product platform. It's a way of understanding the relationship of how much standardization, how much customization you want to provide to your customers. And that's a moving scale. But if we don't make that decision, we will not be able to get the maximum out of these technologies. And at the national scale, ICC has a performance code, but a performance code itself is not enough, but a performance code has been the route within which other countries have been able to get the most out of these technologies we've had for 50 years, so that those companies can operate like all of our other manufacturing companies do. So those two working together, we think, are key. And we actually have all of this, HUD outlined all of this for us 50 years ago. It's pretty much, you could pretty much apply this today and it would look the same. So the other thing that's very important is we are like the European Union, we are a complex patchwork of different entities, jurisdictions. So HUD understood this in 1969 and set up a series of pilot sites to test these barriers, to test the regulatory barriers, to test the finance barriers, and to try to overcome them. So we think the next thing to work on is to have a national strategy but we'd also work from the bottom up. And we're proposing, thinking about at least starting with 6 sites throughout the nation using HUD's regions, including Utah. So building upon the previous work, MODEX, Ivory Innovations, and partners at this conference are helping to frame new breakthrough pilots in 6 of HUD's 10 regions, including Utah, working from the bottom up to identify local and national strategies for improved societal outcomes from industrialized housing delivery. Thank you very much. And to wrap it all together, as Dan has already done for us on a number of occasions, Dan Hardcastle from HUD will explain how HUD is really supporting all of this research. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, we can do freehand. Hello. Is that good for everybody? Awesome. I feel like the downside of having this beautiful setting in the background is that you have to, really kind of bring it to have folks not just be staring off and thinking, oh, bet those are going to be nice to ski on in a couple months. So it's really exciting to hear from Ivan and Ryan about the findings that they had around the world. Seeing countries that have taken what HUD got started 50 years ago and gone further with it than we have. I'm a new parent as of 3 months ago, and I don't know if parents who have older kids than I, this relates at all, but it seems like it might be what it's like to see your child go off and do great things in the world with like what you've taught them. And it's like, oh, it's so wonderful that you're out there changing the world, but like, oh, I wish we were doing a little bit more of that at home. But I think that we really have an opportunity now at HUD. I think that the timing from what the ModX team is bringing back to us, I think there's a unique moment both at HUD and across the administration in terms of the appetite for change, for doing things differently. We're seeing low supply and high interest rates that have made access to affordable housing just an almost unprecedented barriers that folks are facing, and it's something that we're trying to tackle across the board with every lever we have within the federal government, from the work we do at HUD, our research efforts, our efforts to encourage land use reform at the local level, to our colleagues at Department of Energy and EPA and the kind of resources that they have to put out and help with new and innovative construction approaches. To, we even met recently with our colleagues at the Department of Commerce, who are leading the Tech Hubs effort, which is all about improving U.S. competitiveness and silicon manufacturing and other chip-based processes, and talking to them about what is the housing component of that. When you're dropping a brand new fabrication plant outside of Columbus that's ultimately going to have 100,000 people employed on site, what do you do with that? How do you create that housing? And so we're really thinking about it across the board. But the piece that I've really been happy to work on during my time at HUD has been this piece on innovation, particularly on the construction technology side. How can we do things better? How can we build on the lessons of 50 years ago at HUD and today and in other countries, and take us to a point where we are able to achieve things that can move the needle and can bring us to new economies of scale. So on the most innovative side at HUD, we are really excited. This was our third year hosting the Innovative Housing Showcase on the National Mall in partnership with the National Association of Home Builders. And this has really turned into a signature event for us. And, we're really excited to have had some folks here in this very room bring homes out for display over the past couple of years, because that's such a special opportunity to put innovation in front of both a wide public audience. I can tell you, living in DC, that nothing catches folks' attention than waking up one day and seeing, oh, there are a bunch of small houses on the mall. That's not a normal thing. That's not where houses normally are. And a lot of the folks who are seeing that are some of the key decision makers. It's our members of Congress who can see what's going on, just down the hill from them on the mall, and take those learnings and ideas home to their districts and talk with folks in their communities about how they can do more to support these kinds of efforts, to just generally raising awareness, across the industries that are well represented in DC, and just sort of providing a front porch, if you will, for housing innovation. So it's, as part of the summit, we've also had the opportunity to collaborate with ICC to specifically try to highlight the barriers around standardization. We recognize that in achieving the kind of economies of scale that Sweden, that Japan has, and achieving the levels of, not just cost savings, but, design efficiency. And, those 3-minute production times in Japan are just, pretty mind-blowing. Getting to that kind of level in this country absolutely means achieving greater regulatory systemization, making it such that you do have, whether it's the kind of regional networks that you saw illustrated in Ryan's last slide, or in Ivan's last slide, where you have the opportunities to ship across the Intermountain West, where you have harmonization across the inspection regimes across these various states, such that you can build once, inspect once, ship to half of the physical U.S. That's where we need to get to. That's the only way I think that we're going to be able to achieve economies of scale is to move beyond kind of bespoke processes, to move beyond someone who's built a better mousetrap, who has a really awesome idea for a individual unit, but how do you take that awesome idea and turn it into something that is built at a scale that achieves cost savings? The other piece that we, of course, recognize at HUD is that financing is what backs all of this. We can do all the research in the world, and as you heard, that was really what ultimately derailed our Operation Breakthrough more than 50 years ago, was a dry up of financing. We had the vision, we had the private sector partners, and then when the money dried up, there just wasn't the ability to carry these things forward. And so what we're trying to do now is look at our existing programs at HUD and think through how can they better support folks who are trying to do offsite and other forms of innovative construction. So within the Federal Housing Administration, we're really starting to take a look at how we can support modular construction on the multifamily side in particular. When it comes to our single-family programs, I think modular works a little bit better because we treat it essentially like we would any other stick-built home as far as our construction requirements. But when you get into the multifamily side, we've heard a lot of feedback about the construction draw schedules that are necessary under FHA products, and how those often don't align with the kind of front-loaded and off-site nature of factory construction. And so we are hearing from folks about how we can adapt our products, and that's certainly something that would love to hear from folks in this room over the next couple of days, who have either sought FHA financing or who are thinking about it, or what are the barriers that you've run into in terms of utilizing our financing, and are there opportunities for us to think about structuring that in a way that it can be more available and more accessible. We're also working with the communities around the country that HUD supports. HUD doesn't build its own housing. We put billions of dollars into the world each year, for housing construction, but it's through our partners, through communities, through affordable developers, and through individual homeowners in some cases. And so we want to make sure that those folks can pursue innovative ideas and approaches, and then we want to highlight those and share those with others. So one really exciting effort that we like to talk about is something that they did, I guess, the other side of the mountains in Boulder, Colorado, that's ongoing now, where they've used HUD Community Development Block Grant and Section 108 resources to build a modular factory there to help address their affordable financing needs. We're gearing up to produce a webinar on that because it's something that we think a lot of other cities, could follow in that mold. There's, so much interest in, what can be done. And for those who aren't familiar with our CDBG Community Development Program, it's something that is actually more on the community development side than on the housing side. And so it's not something that's always used to build new housing. There are restrictions on that, but it absolutely can be used to build a factory for economic development. And then that factory can build homes. And that way you really are killing two birds with one stone, or feeding two birds with one hand. I guess I heard that recently. That's like the the less violent version of that cliche. But it's a great opportunity, and it's one that we want to make sure that folks are aware of. We're also working with our interagency partners to put out a toolkit of many of the financing sources that are available under the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Under those really transformative investments that we were able to make over the past couple of years, the vast majority of those resources went to other agencies. At HUD, we received $1 billion for the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, which $1 billion ain't what it used to be, I guess. But there are a lot of much larger pools of funding that are available at other agencies, like EPA, like Department of Energy, that are for broad climate objectives. But within that, there is a really strong opportunity to use those resources for housing development, and I think particularly for offsite. Because of so much of the focus I know for folks in the space is around not just how can we build the housing more quickly and less expensively, but how can we build it better? How can we build it to higher climate standards? Utilizing the better tolerances that you find from building indoors. How can we build more efficient housing? And I think that there are a lot of opportunities within these funding pools that folks are starting to take advantage of. For instance, Clayton Homes, the largest HUD code manufacturer, announced earlier this year that they're moving their entire production over to zero energy ready. And they're using the 45L tax credits that are newly available through the Inflation Reduction Act to do so. We're also hearing about folks who are building new modular factories in different parts of the country who are tapping into these resources, who are using it for by building to recognized standards, to zero energy ready, to other green standards. It opens up new pools of financing. So that's something that we definitely want to put forward for folks and make sure that folks are able to tap into. The other pieces that we really want to utilize that are currently within our powers are the HUD code. I think of it as our sort of secret superpower, and it's something that as Ivan noted, is something that we haven't utilized fully historically, but our recent changes to it really move the HUD code into new directions, to new infill opportunities. We're now able to build multi-story under the HUD code for the first time. We're about to have new updates that will allow for multi-unit, where you have multiple homes within a single section of the HUD code property, so that you're able to really find HUD code fitting into more infill type construction. Again, we are also doing a lot on the financing side, specifically for HUD code manufactured homes, updating our Title I program, and then offering new resources to communities through our Price Fund for manufactured housing and manufactured communities. The last item I'll note is a recent announcement we made just this week that I'm particularly happy with, which is our new changes around financing for accessory dwelling units at FHA. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap. Thank you. Yeah, as someone who worked on ADUs before coming to HUD, it's really a full circle moment for me, because we have, for the first time, allowed homeowners to use the projected income that the ADU will generate to get the financing they need to build it in the first place, because the folks who can often most benefit financially from building an ADU are not the folks who can most readily achieve the financing for it. So to wrap up, I'm just really excited to be around and listen and learn from all the folks in this room, to hear about the innovations that you're pursuing. Again, HUD is, despite our national reach, we're not top down. We don't build our own housing. We provide resources for folks who do, and so want to hear those ideas that folks are pursuing and think about how HUD can help bring them to scale. So thank you.